The year is 1941. Soviet bomber formations darken the Finnish sky, their crews confident in their numerical superiority. Below, a stubby little fighter plane rises to meet them, an aircraft so ridiculed by American pilots that they nicknamed it the Flying Coffin. But in the hands of Finnish pilots, this rejected American fighter would become something extraordinary. The Brewster Buffalo, considered one of the worst combat aircraft of World War II, would achieve the most astonishing kill ratio of any fighter plane in history. This is the story of how 44 cast-off American planes, flown by a tiny nation's air force, humiliated one of the world's superpowers and rewrote everything we thought we knew about aerial combat. The Brewster F2A Buffalo occupies one of the strangest places in aviation history. In American hands, it was a disaster, slow, clumsy, and completely outmatched by Japanese fighters at the Battle of Midway. Marines who flew it called it the Flying Coffin, and one pilot grimly stated that anyone sent into battle in a Buffalo should be considered lost before they even left the ground. Yet in Finnish hands, this same aircraft achieved something miraculous, a combat record so extraordinary that military historians still struggle to explain it. Between June 1941 and May 1944, Finnish Buffalo pilots shot down 477 Soviet aircraft while losing only 19 of their own planes in combat. That's a kill ratio of approximately 26-1, better than any other fighter aircraft of World War II, including legendary planes like the F-6F Hellcat or the P-51 Mustang. To understand how this happened, we need to go back to the beginning, to a time when Finland was desperately searching for any weapon it could find to defend itself against the Soviet Union. Finland's relationship with military aviation began in tragedy and determination. During the Winter War of 1939 to 1940, the tiny Finnish Air Force faced the might of the Soviet Union with only 114 combat aircraft of all types. The Soviets, by contrast, could field thousands of planes. Finnish pilots flew outdated biplanes and whatever foreign aircraft they could acquire, fighting with such ferocity that they managed to shoot down 240 Soviet aircraft while losing only 62 of their own. But everyone knew this couldn't last. Finland needed modern fighters, and they needed them desperately. The Brewster Aeronautical Corporation had designed the F2A Buffalo in the mid-1930s as America's first modern carrier-based monoplane fighter. It won a competition against the Grumman F-4F Wildcat in 1939 to become the U.S. Navy's primary fighter aircraft. On paper, it looked promising: all-metal construction, retractable landing gear, an enclosed cockpit, and a powerful radial engine. But problems emerged almost immediately. The plane was unstable, difficult to handle at low speeds, and its landing gear was notoriously weak. As newer, better fighters appeared, the U.S. Navy quickly relegated the Buffalo to secondary duties. This created an opportunity for Finland. In late 1939, as the Winter War raged, the Roosevelt administration sympathized with Finland's plight. The U.S. government arranged to divert 44 F2A-1 Buffaloes originally intended for the U.S. Navy to Finland. These weren't the latest models. They were essentially the planes the Navy no longer wanted. But for Finland, they represented salvation. The planes that arrived in Finland were different from their American counterparts. Designated B-239, these were essentially denavalized versions of the F2A-1. The Finns removed the tailhook, the life raft, and much of the naval equipment that added weight, but served no purpose in land-based operations. This made the planes significantly lighter, almost 1,000 pounds lighter than the versions that would later fail so spectacularly at Midway. The Finnish modifications didn't stop there. Finnish mechanics and engineers approached the Buffalo with the practical mindset of people who couldn't afford to waste anything. They installed reflector gun sights from damaged aircraft, modified the cockpit heating system for the brutal Nordic winters, and adjusted the armament to their preferences. Where American pilots complained about the Buffalo's 4.50 caliber machine guns jamming, the Finns meticulously maintained them and developed specific ammunition loads that reduced stoppages. But the real difference wasn't in the mechanical modifications. It was in the men who flew them. Finnish pilots in 1941 were arguably the best-trained fighter pilots in the world, not because Finland had superior training programs or unlimited resources, but because they had been forged in the crucible of the Winter War. Pilots like Jorma Sarvanto, who had shot down 6 Soviet bombers in 4 minutes during the Winter War, brought combat experience that couldn't be taught in any flight school. The Finnish Air Force had developed a unique doctrine during the Winter War that perfectly suited the Buffalo's characteristics. Instead of engaging in turning dogfights where the Buffalo's weight would be a disadvantage, Finnish pilots used energy tactics, climbing high, diving on their targets, and using their speed to escape before the enemy could react. They called this the hit and run tactic, though it would later become known worldwide as boom and zoom. Consider the story of Juho Jussi Hutala, who exemplified the Finnish approach to air combat. During a patrol in July 1941, Hutala spotted a formation of Soviet SB bombers escorted by I-16 fighters. Instead of immediately attacking, he climbed several thousand feet above them, positioning his Buffalo perfectly in the sun. When he finally dove, the Soviets never saw him coming. He destroyed one bomber on his first pass, climbed away before the escorts could react, and repeated the process. In less than 10 minutes, he had shot down 3 aircraft without taking a single hit. The Finnish pilots also benefited from something their Soviet opponents lacked: respect for their equipment. While Soviet doctrine emphasized quantity over quality, treating both planes and pilots as expendable resources, the Finns knew they had to make every aircraft count. A Finnish Buffalo pilot might fly the same plane for years, learning its every quirk and characteristic. They gave their planes names like Orange Pearl and White Lightning, painting personal emblems on the fuselages. The first major test came on June 25, 1941, just days after Germany invaded the Soviet Union and Finland entered what would be called the Continuation War. A pair of Buffaloes from Fighter Squadron 24 intercepted 27 Soviet bombers near Heinola. The Finnish pilots, outnumbered more than 13-1, shot down 5 bombers without loss. It was a preview of what was to come. Squadron 24, equipped with Buffaloes, would become the most successful fighter squadron in Finnish history. Based at various airfields near the front lines, they operated in conditions that would have grounded most air forces. In winter, temperatures dropped to -40 degrees Celsius. Mechanics had to warm engines with portable heaters for hours before each flight. Pilots flew with wool-lined boots and multiple layers of clothing that made movement in the cramped cockpit difficult. The Soviet pilots they faced in 1941 were not the same opponents Finland had fought in the Winter War. Stalin's purges had decimated the Soviet officer corps, including the Air Force leadership. Many experienced pilots had been executed or imprisoned, replaced by inexperienced youngsters who barely knew how to fly their aircraft, let alone fight in them. Soviet tactical doctrine was rigid and inflexible. Pilots were forbidden from deviating from predetermined flight plans, even when under attack. The Brewster Buffalo's success in Finnish hands becomes even more remarkable when you consider what happened to the same aircraft in other theaters. In Malaya and Singapore, British Commonwealth pilots flying Buffaloes against the Japanese suffered catastrophic losses. More than 60 Buffaloes were shot down in combat, with 40 more destroyed on the ground. The kill ratio was a dismal 1.3-1. At Midway, Marine Squadron VMF-221 lost 13 of 19 Buffaloes in a single engagement, with most of the pilots killed. The difference wasn't just pilot quality, it was the entire approach to aerial warfare. The Finnish Air Force operated on principles that wouldn't become standard in other air forces until much later in the war. They emphasized marksmanship above all else, training pilots to hold their fire until they were within 50 meters of their target. This meant that when a Finnish pilot opened fire, he rarely missed. Lieutenant Lauri Pekuri, who would survive the war with 18 victories in Buffaloes, described the Finnish shooting doctrine. We were taught that ammunition was precious. Every bullet had to count. The Americans would open fire at 300 meters and spray bullets everywhere. We waited until we could see the rivets on the enemy plane, then fired short, precise bursts. Usually, one or two bursts were enough. The psychological impact of the Buffalo's success on Soviet pilots was profound. Soviet combat reports from 1941 and 1942 frequently mention new German fighters operating in the Finnish sectors. The Soviets couldn't believe that the outdated-looking Buffaloes were destroying their modern aircraft. Radio intercepts revealed Soviet pilots warning each other about the deadly Finnish fighters, and sometimes refusing to engage when Buffaloes were spotted. Hans Wind emerged as the ultimate Buffalo ace, scoring 39 of his eventual 75 victories in the type. Wind's combat reports read like a masterclass in fighter tactics. On one mission in June 1943, he encountered 8 Soviet La-GG-3 fighters, aircraft that were theoretically superior to the Buffalo in every way. Wind shot down 4 of them in 12 minutes, using the Buffalo's excellent visibility to keep track of all 8 enemies, while using vertical maneuvers to prevent them from bringing their superior speed to bear. But Wind's most remarkable achievement came in a battered Buffalo that should never have flown in combat. BW-393 had been damaged in a forced landing, repaired with parts from 3 other wrecked Buffaloes, and had an engine that mechanics warned was on its last legs. Wind flew it anyway, and in this patched-together plane, he shot down 5 Soviet aircraft in 3 days before the engine finally gave out completely. The Finns developed tactics specifically tailored to the Buffalo's strengths and weaknesses. They discovered that the Buffalo, despite its tubby appearance, had an excellent roll rate at medium speeds. Finnish pilots would use a defensive maneuver they called the Buffalo Shuffle, a series of rapid rolls combined with slight changes in direction that made them nearly impossible to hit while maintaining their energy state. The Finnish Buffaloes also benefited from superior maintenance and logistics, despite operating under incredibly harsh conditions. Finnish mechanics became experts at keeping the right cyclone engines running in Arctic conditions. They developed special cold weather lubricants, modified the cooling systems to prevent overcooling in winter, and created elaborate camouflage schemes that made the Buffaloes nearly invisible against the Finnish landscape of forests and lakes. One story illustrates the dedication of Finnish ground crews. In February 1942, Mechanic Corporal Cal Turvo spent 18 hours straight working on a damaged Buffalo in temperatures of -35 degrees Celsius. He had to stop every 20 minutes to warm his hands, but he refused to quit until the plane was ready. The next day, that Buffalo shot down 2 Soviet aircraft. The individual aircraft themselves became legends. BW-364, flown primarily by Ilmari Juutalainen, became the highest-scoring single fighter plane of World War II, with 42.5 confirmed kills. Juutalainen himself scored 28 of his 34 Buffalo victories in this one aircraft. The plane seemed to have a charmed life, despite being hit numerous times, suffering engine failures, and once having half its tail shot away, it always brought its pilot home. The Finnish Air Force's intelligence network also played a crucial role in the Buffalo's success. Unlike the Soviets, who often flew predictable patrol patterns and schedules, the Finns had developed an elaborate early warning system using observers equipped with field telephones stationed throughout the frontier. These observers, often local civilians including women and children, would report Soviet aircraft movements, allowing Buffalo pilots to position themselves advantageously before the enemy arrived. This network proved its worth repeatedly. On one occasion in August 1942, observers reported a large formation of Soviet P-2 bombers heading for the Finnish airfield at Imola. The warning gave the Buffalo pilots 15 minutes to prepare. When the Soviet formation arrived, expecting to catch the Finns on the ground, they instead flew into a perfectly positioned ambush. 7 bombers were shot down in 5 minutes, and the rest fled without dropping a single bomb. The human cost of the air war was starkly different for both sides. While the Finns lost 19 Buffaloes in air combat during the entire continuation war, the Soviets lost hundreds of aircraft to Finnish fighters. But these weren't just statistics. Each loss represented human tragedy. Finnish pilot Kyösti Karhila, who scored 32 victories in Buffaloes, later reflected on the psychological burden. We tried not to think about the men in those planes. They were the enemy, yes, but they were also someone's son, husband, father. After the war, I sometimes wondered about the families of the men I shot down. The Soviet pilots faced not just the Finnish Buffaloes, but also the harsh reality of Stalin's regime. Failure in combat could mean execution or the Gulag. Soviet pilot Viktor Belenko, who defected to the West in 1976, revealed that during World War II, Soviet pilots who lost their aircraft were often court-martialed, even if they had been shot down in combat against overwhelming odds. This fear of punishment led to falsified combat reports and a culture where admitting that obsolete Finnish fighters were defeating modern Soviet aircraft was potentially fatal. As 1942 progressed, the nature of the air war began to change. The Soviets started receiving Lend-Lease aircraft from Britain and America, Hurricanes, P-39 Aerocobras, and P-40 Warhawks. These aircraft were more capable than the older Soviet designs, and their pilots were gaining experience. The easy victories of 1941 became harder fought, though the Finnish Buffaloes continued to maintain their extraordinary kill ratio. The Buffalo pilots developed specific tactics for each type of enemy aircraft they faced. Against the Soviet I-16, which could outturn the Buffalo, they used vertical maneuvers. Against the faster La GG-3, they would force the fight into a turning battle where the Buffalo's lower wing loading gave it an advantage. Against bombers, they perfected the head-on attack, using the Buffalo's concentrated firepower to destroy the enemy in a single pass. Squadron leader Gustaf Magnusson, who commanded Fighter Squadron 24 during its most successful period, instituted a policy that would seem reckless by modern standards. New pilots were sent into combat on their very first operational flight. We couldn't afford long training periods, he explained after the war, but we paired each new pilot with a veteran. The rookie's job was simple: stick to his leader's wing and learn. If he survived his first 5 missions, he usually survived the war. This brutal apprenticeship system worked. Of the 36 Finnish pilots who became aces in Buffaloes, many scored their first victories within days of joining their squadrons. The combination of excellent training, veteran leadership, and the forgiving flight characteristics of the lightened B-239 created a perfect environment for developing fighter pilots. The Buffalo's success extended beyond air-to-air combat. Finnish pilots discovered that their aircraft made excellent ground attack platforms. The Buffalo's stable flight characteristics at low altitude, combined with its robust radial engine that could absorb considerable damage, made it ideal for strafing runs against Soviet supply columns and airfields. On one memorable mission in March 1943, 4 Buffaloes destroyed 18 Soviet aircraft on the ground at a forward airfield, along with fuel dumps and ammunition stores. The psychological warfare aspect of the Buffalo's success cannot be understated. Soviet propaganda, which consistently claimed air superiority over Finland, had to explain why so many of their aircraft weren't returning from missions. The official line was that the Finns were using secret German superfighters, refusing to acknowledge that American-built cast-offs were decimating their air force. Meanwhile, the Buffalo pilots became national heroes in Finland. Their exploits were front-page news, and their faces appeared on postcards and propaganda posters. Children played Buffaloes and Russians in the streets. When ace pilot Nils Katajainen was shot down and walked 60 kilometers through enemy territory to return to Finnish lines, his story was made into a popular song. The technical evolution of the Buffalo in Finnish service continued throughout its operational life. Finnish engineers experimented with different propeller configurations, finding that a Hamilton standard propeller from a captured Soviet aircraft actually improved the Buffalo's climb rate. They developed field modifications for different seasons: skis for winter operations on frozen lakes, dust filters for summer operations from dirt strips. One of the most innovative modifications was the addition of German-made armor plate to protect the pilot. The original Buffalo had minimal armor protection, but Finnish mechanics added carefully positioned steel plates that protected vital areas without significantly affecting the aircraft's center of gravity or performance. This modification saved numerous pilots' lives, including Hans Wind, who was saved by his armor plate when a Soviet fighter put a 20 cannon shell through his cockpit. The maintenance challenges faced by Finnish ground crews were extraordinary. By 1943, spare parts for the Wright Cyclone engines were almost impossible to obtain. Finnish mechanics became masters of improvisation, manufacturing replacement parts in field workshops, cannibalizing wrecked aircraft, and even using parts from captured Soviet planes when they could be adapted. One Buffalo flew for 6 months with a cylinder from a Soviet M88 engine replacing one of its damaged right cylinders. The weather conditions in which these aircraft operated would have grounded most air forces. Finnish Buffaloes flew in blizzards, ice storms, and fog so thick that pilots navigated by following railroad tracks at treetop height. In summer, they operated from rough field strips that turned into mud baths after rain. The fact that the Buffalo's wide-track landing gear, originally designed for carrier operations, proved ideal for these rough fields was one of the few instances where the plane's naval heritage was actually an advantage. Personal accounts from Finnish Buffalo pilots reveal the intense bond they developed with their aircraft. Captain Jorma Sarvanto wrote in his diary, "My Buffalo isn't pretty, and she's not fast, but she's honest. She tells me what she can do and what she can't. When I push her too hard, she shudders a warning. When I treat her right, she brings me home. In this war, that's all I can ask for." The cultural impact of the Buffalo's success extended beyond military circles. Finnish composers wrote orchestral pieces inspired by the sound of Buffalo engines. Artists painted dramatic aerial combat scenes that hung in galleries in Helsinki. The Buffalo became a symbol of Finnish ingenuity and determination, taking something discarded by others and making it exceptional. As 1943 turned to 1944, the Finns knew their Buffaloes were becoming increasingly obsolete. The Soviets were now flying La-5s, Yak-9s, and the latest versions of the American P-39 Airacobra. These aircraft were faster, climbed better, and were more heavily armed than the Buffalo. Yet even against these superior opponents, Finnish Buffalo pilots continued to score victories, though at an increasingly heavy cost. The story of Lieutenant Orva Tuomainen illustrates the changing nature of the conflict. In 1942, flying a Buffalo, he could engage Soviet aircraft with confidence. By early 1944, he found himself constantly on the defensive. The Russians had learned, he recalled. They no longer flew in predictable formations. They used tactics similar to ours, energy fighting, hit and run attacks, and their planes were simply better. We had to be perfect just to survive. Despite these challenges, the Buffalo's combat record remained extraordinary. Even in the final months of their operational service, Finnish Buffaloes were shooting down multiple enemy aircraft for each loss. This wasn't just due to pilot skill. It was a testament to the complete system the Finns had developed around the aircraft. Every element, from intelligence gathering to maintenance to tactical doctrine, was optimized to maximize the Buffalo's effectiveness. The emotional toll on pilots increased as the war progressed. Many had been flying combat missions for 3 or 4 years straight. Pilot fatigue became a serious issue. Captain Orlys Lummy, who scored 16 victories in Buffaloes, described the exhaustion. By 1944, I was so tired I would fall asleep the moment I landed. Sometimes I couldn't remember the details of the mission I had just flown. But when the alarm bell rang, you got in your plane and flew. That's what we did. The Finnish government recognized the strain on their pilots and instituted a rotation system in late 1943. Veteran pilots were sent to rear areas to train newcomers or given staff positions, but many refused to leave their squadrons. Hans Wind, despite being offered a safe training position, continued flying combat missions until he was severely wounded in June 1944. The Buffalo's swan song came during the massive Soviet offensive of June 1944. The Soviets launched their largest operation against Finland since the Winter War, with overwhelming numerical superiority in all areas. Finnish Buffaloes flew multiple sorties per day, sometimes operating from airfields under artillery fire. During the critical battles around the Karelian Isthmus, every operational Buffalo was in the air. On June 28, 1944, one of the war's most remarkable aerial engagements took place. 6 Finnish Buffaloes encountered approximately 30 Soviet aircraft, a mix of Il-2 Sturmovix, P-2 bombers, and Yak-9 fighters. Outnumbered 5-1, the Finnish pilots shot down 9 Soviet aircraft without loss. It was a magnificent victory, but it couldn't change the strategic situation. Finland was running out of men, equipment, and allies. The gradual replacement of the Buffalo began in earnest in mid-1944. The Germans had finally delivered Messerschmitt Bf-109Gs to Finland, and these modern fighters were desperately needed to counter the latest Soviet aircraft. Yet many Finnish pilots were reluctant to give up their Buffaloes. Corporal Lauri Pekuri later told historian Dan Ford, "The Messerschmitt was faster and climbed better, but it lacked the Buffalo's humanity. I could not love it the way I loved my Buffalo." The statistics of the Buffalo's service in Finland remain staggering. Squadron 24 alone claimed 477 victories while losing just 19 Buffaloes in air combat. When all Finnish Buffalo operations are considered, including those of Squadron 26, which received Buffaloes later in the war, the total number of victories approaches 500. No other fighter aircraft in any air force achieved such a favorable kill ratio during World War II. Individual pilots achieved remarkable scores in the Buffalo. Besides Hans Wind's 39 victories, Ilmari Jutalainen scored 28 in Buffaloes, Jorma Sarvanto got 12, and Nils Katajainen achieved 17. In total, 36 Finnish pilots became aces while flying the Buffalo, including 6 of Finland's top 10 aces. These weren't lucky victories against inferior opponents. They were achieved against increasingly capable Soviet aircraft and pilots. The international aviation community initially refused to believe the Finnish claims. The idea that the worst fighter of World War II had achieved the best combat record seemed impossible. It wasn't until after the war, when Finnish records were examined and cross-referenced with Soviet loss reports that became available after the Cold War, that the true magnitude of the Buffalo's success became undeniable. Military historians have spent decades trying to expel. Third, Finnish tactical doctrine perfectly suited the Buffalo's characteristics. While American and British pilots tried to dogfight in the Buffalo, where its weight and low power-to-weight ratio were disadvantages, the Finns used energy tactics that maximized the plane's strengths while minimizing its weaknesses. Fourth, the early Soviet opposition, particularly in 1941 and 1942, was often poorly trained and flying obsolete aircraft. By the time better Soviet planes and pilots appeared, the Finns had years of combat experience in the Buffalo. The human factor cannot be overlooked. Finnish pilots weren't fighting for conquest or ideology, they were defending their homeland. Every victory meant their families were safer for another day. This motivation, combined with the Finnish cultural trait of sisu, a concept roughly translating to determined perseverance in the face of extreme adversity, created pilots who simply refused to lose. The story of Sergeant Timo Millele exemplifies this spirit. In January 1944, Millele's Buffalo was severely damaged by a Soviet fighter. With his engine failing, hydraulics gone, and canopy jammed shut, Millele managed to shoot down his attacker before crash landing on a frozen lake. He survived the crash, broke open the canopy with his boot, and walked 20 kilometers through enemy territory in a blizzard to reach Finnish lines. 2 weeks later, he was flying combat missions again. The Soviet perspective on the Buffalo reveals another dimension of the story. Post-war Soviet memoirs and reports, many only available after 1991, show that Soviet pilots feared and respected the Finnish Buffaloes. Veteran Soviet pilot Nikolai Golodnikov recalled, "We were told the Finns flew American junk, but those junk planes shot down our best pilots. We learned to be very careful when operating in Finnish airspace." Soviet tactical adjustments to counter the Buffalo threat included flying at higher altitudes to negate the Finnish early warning system, using clouds and weather fronts for concealment, and eventually avoiding engagement with Finnish fighters whenever possible. The fact that a numerically superior air force was forced to adopt such defensive measures against 44 obsolete American fighters speaks volumes about the Buffalo's impact. The maintenance story of the Buffalo in Finnish service deserves special recognition. By 1944, some Finnish Buffaloes had been rebuilt multiple times. BW-372, which now sits in the Finnish Air Force Museum, was shot down and recovered from a lake in 1942. Finnish mechanics rebuilt it using parts from 3 other wrecked Buffaloes, and it flew combat missions for another 2 years. This level of resourcefulness was born of necessity, but became a point of pride. Finnish mechanics developed innovations that would later become standard in military aviation. They created quick-change engine mounts that allowed a damaged engine to be replaced in under 4 hours. They developed heating systems that kept engines warm overnight, eliminating lengthy warm-up procedures. They even experimented with methanol injection systems to boost engine power for short periods, a precursor to the water methanol injection systems used in late-war German fighters. The cultural legacy of the Buffalo in Finland extends far beyond military history. The plane became a symbol of Finnish independence and ingenuity. Children's books featured Buffalo pilots as heroes. Folk songs celebrated their victories. Even today, the silhouette of a buffalo appears on Finnish Air Force memorabilia and veterans' monuments. The end of the Continuation War in September 1944 didn't immediately end the Buffalo's service. Under the armistice terms with the Soviet Union, Finland had to expel German forces from its territory. During this Lapland War, Finnish Buffaloes flew reconnaissance missions and provided air cover for ground forces. It was a strange ending, flying American planes against former German allies to satisfy Soviet demands. The last combat mission flown by a Finnish Buffalo took place on April 27, 1945, just days before the end of World War II in Europe. It was a reconnaissance flight over Lapland, checking for remaining German positions. The pilot, Lieutenant Pekka Korhonen, reported it was entirely uneventful, a fitting anticlimax for an aircraft that had defied all expectations. Post-war, the surviving Buffaloes continued to serve. 8 remained airworthy at war's end, and they were used for training and liaison duties until 1948. The Finnish Air Force, forced by treaty to limit its combat aircraft, couldn't afford to discard any flyable planes. These last Buffaloes, worn out from years of combat and patched together from salvaged parts, soldiered on until they literally couldn't fly anymore. The retirement ceremony for the last Finnish Buffalo in September 1948 was attended by hundreds of veterans and civilians. General Gustaf Magnusson, who had commanded the Buffalo squadrons during their glory days, gave a speech that brought many to tears. "This little plane, rejected by others, became our sword and shield. In our darkest hour, it gave us wings of victory. We do not say goodbye to a machine, we say farewell to a faithful friend who never let us down." The scrapping of the remaining Buffaloes in 1953 was met with public outcry. Many felt these historic aircraft should have been preserved. Unfortunately, post-war Finland was rebuilding and couldn't afford sentimentality. The planes were cut up for scrap metal, their Wright Cyclone engines sold to logging companies to power sawmills. It seemed the Buffalo story in Finland would end in an industrial furnace. But history has a way of preserving what matters. In 1998, the wreckage of Buffalo BW-372 was discovered in Lake Kolkonjärvi, where it had crashed in 1942. The recovery operation became a national event, with television crews broadcasting live as the battered fighter was raised from its watery grave. Though damaged and corroded, it was unmistakably a Buffalo, the last of its kind. The restoration debate that followed revealed how deeply the buffalo was embedded in Finnish national consciousness. Some wanted it fully restored to flying condition. Others argued it should be preserved exactly as recovered, battle damage and all. The compromise, displaying it unrestored but stabilized, allows visitors to see both the aircraft's punishment and its resilience. Modern aviation historians continue to study the Finnish buffalo phenomenon. Computer simulations have confirmed that the weight reduction and modifications made by the Finns significantly improved the aircraft's performance. The Finnish B-239, at combat weight, had a power-to-weight ratio comparable to early model Spitfires. Combined with the Buffalo's excellent visibility and robust construction, it was actually well suited to the combat environment of the Eastern Front. The tactical lessons learned from Finnish Buffalo operations influenced post-war fighter doctrine worldwide. The energy management techniques perfected by Finnish pilots became standard training in air forces around the world. The emphasis on marksmanship over volume of fire influenced fighter armament design. Even the Finnish early warning and ground control system presaged modern air defense networks. Personal testimonies from Finnish Buffalo pilots, many recorded in their final years, provide intimate insights into the experience of flying these aircraft in combat. Veteran Ace Kyösti Karhila, who died in 1997, left detailed memoirs describing not just the combat, but the daily life of a Buffalo pilot. The pre-dawn briefings, the tension of waiting for scramble orders, the mixture of fear and exhilaration in combat, the grief of losing squadron mates. The international recognition of the Buffalo's Finnish success came slowly. For decades, Western aviation histories either ignored or dismissed Finnish claims as propaganda. It wasn't until Finnish and Soviet archives were opened to researchers in the 1990s that the full picture emerged. The correlation between Finnish victory claims and Soviet loss records was remarkably close. The Finns had actually been conservative in their claims. This revelation forced a reconsideration of many assumptions about World War II air combat. If the worst fighter could achieve the best record under the right circumstances, what did that say about aircraft evaluation? Military analysts began to understand that platform capability was just one factor in combat effectiveness. Doctrine, training, maintenance, and motivation could overcome technical deficiencies. The story of individual Buffalo aircraft adds human drama to the statistics. BW-393, Hans Wynn's favorite mount, survived 127 combat missions despite being hit by enemy fire on 23 separate occasions. The ground crew kept a map of the aircraft showing every bullet hole and patch. By war's end, there was hardly an original panel left on the fuselage, yet it kept flying and fighting. The emotional bond between pilots and their buffaloes extended to ground crews. Mechanic Sergeant Viljo Korpinen, who maintained several Aces aircraft, kept a diary documenting every mission, every repair, every close call. His entry for June 4, 1944, reads, "Wynn's Buffalo came back with 47 holes. Spent all night patching. He needs it tomorrow. Cannot let him down." This dedication meant that Finnish Buffaloes had one of the highest serviceability rates of any combat aircraft in World War II. The economic aspect of the Buffalo's success is often overlooked. Finland paid approximately $54,000 per Buffalo in 1940 dollars. For that investment, they destroyed nearly 500 Soviet aircraft worth millions of dollars, not to mention the irreplaceable trained aircrew. In terms of cost-effectiveness, the Finnish Buffaloes may have been the best military investment of World War II. The psychological impact on Finnish society went beyond military success. The Buffalo victories provided hope during the darkest days of the war. When Soviet bombers threatened Finnish cities, people took comfort knowing the Buffaloes were rising to meet them. The distinctive sound of Wright Cyclone engines became synonymous with protection and defiance. Children who grew up during the war years later recalled the impact of the Buffalo on their psyche. Major Lindqvist, who was 8 years old in 1942, remembered, "When we heard the Soviet planes coming, we were terrified. But then we'd hear the buffaloes take off from the nearby airfield, and we knew we were safe. Those pilots were our guardian angels. The technical evolution of Soviet aircraft in response to the buffalo threat is another untold aspect of the story. Soviet designers studied crashed buffaloes, trying to understand what made them so effective in Finnish hands. They noted the excellent visibility from the cockpit, the effective armament arrangement, and the robust construction. Elements of these observations appeared in later Soviet fighter designs. The training legacy of Finnish Buffalo pilots extended long after the war. Many survived to become instructors in the post-war Finnish Air Force, passing on their hard-won knowledge to new generations. The emphasis on marksmanship, energy management, and tactical flexibility became hallmarks of Finnish fighter doctrine that persist to this day. International military attachés who observed Finnish Buffalo operations during the war wrote detailed reports that influenced their own air forces. The British Air Ministry studied Finnish tactics to improve Hurricane operations in the Soviet Union. The Luftwaffe analyzed Finnish success to understand why their own allies were struggling. Even the Americans, belatedly, recognized that they had dismissed the Buffalo too quickly. The story of the Finnish Buffalo's challenges our understanding of military technology and effectiveness. It demonstrates that success in warfare isn't just about having the best equipment. It's about maximizing what you have through training, tactics, maintenance, and sheer determination. The Finns took an aircraft everyone else had written off and turned it into a legend. Weather played a crucial but often unrecognized role in the Buffalo's success. The extreme conditions of the Finnish climate actually suited the air-cooled Wright Cyclone engine better than the liquid-cooled engines of many contemporary fighters. While German Bf-109s and Soviet Yak fighters struggled with coolant leaks and frozen radiators, the Buffalo's radial engine just kept running. Finnish mechanics joked that the Buffalo was too simple to fail. The role of women in the Buffalo story deserves recognition. Finnish women served as aircraft spotters, ammunition loaders, and even mechanics. Lempi Resinen became famous as the Buffalo Mother, managing the mess hall at the main Buffalo base and ensuring pilots were well fed before missions. She knew every pilot by name and their food preferences. Many credited her morale-boosting presence as essential to squadron effectiveness. The intelligence war surrounding the Buffalo was fascinating. The Soviets desperately tried to capture an intact Finnish Buffalo to study its modifications. They offered rewards to pilots who could force one down in Soviet territory. The Finns, aware of this, instituted strict procedures for destroying any buffalo that had to land in enemy territory. Only one intact Finnish buffalo was ever captured by the Soviets, and the pilot had removed several critical components before abandoning it. Personal survival stories add drama to the Buffalo saga. Lieutenant Urho Leitavara was shot down 3 times in buffaloes. Each time, he survived and returned to fly again. On his third shoot-down, he spent 4 days walking through enemy territory, evading Soviet patrols, living on berries and stream water. When he finally reached Finnish lines, his first question was whether his squadron had any spare buffaloes. The maintenance improvisation reached remarkable levels. When buffalo tires became impossible to obtain, Finnish mechanics experimented with different rubber compounds, eventually creating tires from salvaged Soviet truck tires reinforced with canvas from old parachutes. These improvised tires actually lasted longer than the originals on rough Finnish airfields. The cultural exchange between Finnish and American aviation through the Buffalo was limited but significant. A few American volunteer pilots flew with the Finns early in the continuation war, and they were amazed at what the Finns had achieved with the Buffalo. One American pilot, Lieutenant John Jack Morrison, wrote home, "These Finns are doing things with the Buffalo that we were told were impossible. They're making us look like amateurs." The Soviet response to Finnish Buffalo tactics evolved throughout the war. By 1943, Soviet training manuals specifically addressed how to fight Finnish buffaloes. They emphasized attacking from below where the buffalo's visibility was limited, using clouds for concealment, and never engaging in turning fights. The fact that an entire tactical doctrine was developed to counter 44 aircraft speaks to their impact. The logistical challenges of keeping Buffaloes operational became increasingly severe as the war progressed. By 1944, Finnish mechanics were manufacturing over 60% of spare parts locally. They set up underground workshops to avoid Soviet bombing, where skilled craftsmen handmade everything from control cables to engine pistons. The quality of these handmade parts was so high that post-war analysis couldn't distinguish them from factory originals. The emotional toll of combat on Buffalo pilots was severe but rarely discussed at the time. Post-war psychiatric evaluations revealed that many suffered from what would now be diagnosed as PTSD. Nightmares, anxiety, and survivor's guilt were common. Yet during the war, they flew day after day, mission after mission, because their country's survival depended on it. The Finnish Buffalo story intersected with larger geopolitical events in unexpected ways. In 1943, Stalin personally inquired about the Finnish fighters that were causing such havoc. When told they were American-made Buffaloes, he reportedly laughed, thinking his generals were making excuses. It wasn't until intelligence reports confirmed the aircraft type that he believed it and ordered increased fighter transfers to the Finnish front. The preservation efforts for Buffalo memory in Finland continue today. Schools near former Buffalo bases teach local history, including the aircraft's role. Veterans, children, and grandchildren maintain websites documenting their ancestors' service. The Finnish Aviation Museum receives thousands of visitors annually, many specifically to see the recovered Buffalo. Technical analysis, using modern tools, has revealed subtle advantages of the Finnish modifications. Wind tunnel testing of scale models showed that the removal of naval equipment actually improved the Buffalo's aerodynamics more than initially thought. The cleaner belly profile reduced drag by nearly 8%, contributing to better climb rates and acceleration. The international legacy of Finnish Buffalo operations extends to modern military doctrine. The concept of asymmetric warfare, using unexpected tactics and equipment to defeat a stronger opponent, draws directly from Finnish experience. Military academies worldwide study the Buffalo case as an example of innovation overcoming material disadvantage. The final combat statistics remain staggering. Finnish Buffaloes flew approximately 5865 combat sorties, engaged in over 450 aerial combats, and achieved 477 confirmed victories against 19 air-to-air losses. No other fighter aircraft in any air force achieved such overwhelming superiority. When ground losses and accidents are included, total Buffalo losses were still only around 25 aircraft, a remarkably low number for 4 years of intense combat. The human cost behind these statistics was significant but disproportionate. The Soviets lost hundreds of trained pilots and crew to Finnish Buffaloes. Many were experienced aviators who couldn't be easily replaced. The Finns lost brave men too. Each of the 19 air combat losses meant a pilot who didn't come home. But the exchange ratio meant Finland could sustain its air defense while the Soviets couldn't maintain offensive pressure. The post-war fate of Buffalo pilots varied widely. Some, like Ilmari Jutalainen, lived long lives, dying peacefully in 1999 at age 85. Others struggled with the transition to peacetime. A few emigrated, unable to adjust to post-war Finland. But most remained, rebuilding their country and rarely speaking of their wartime exploits until historians came calling decades later. The technical documentation of Finnish Buffalo modifications, thought lost, was discovered in 1987 in a forgotten warehouse. These documents revealed the extent of Finnish innovation. Over 200 separate modifications were documented, ranging from minor adjustments to major structural changes. This treasure trove of information has helped historians understand exactly how the Finns transformed a mediocre fighter into a world beater. Modern pilots who have flown restored Buffaloes, though not the Finnish variant, describe an aircraft that's challenging but honest. It doesn't forgive ham-fisted flying, but treats skilled pilots well. The excellent visibility, responsive controls at medium speeds, and stable gun platform characteristics that Finnish pilots praised are still evident. One modern pilot noted, "Flying the Buffalo, you understand why the Finns loved it. It's not pretty or fast, but it does exactly what you tell it to do." The economic impact of the Buffalo's success extended beyond military considerations. Finnish propaganda featuring Buffalo victories helped maintain home front morale, crucial for a small nation fighting a superpower. War bonds featuring Buffalo imagery sold well. The aircraft became a symbol of national resistance that transcended its military role. The story reaches its emotional crescendo when we consider what might have been. If Finland hadn't received those 44 Buffaloes, would they have survived the continuation war? Soviet numerical superiority might have achieved air supremacy, allowing devastating bombing of Finnish cities and supply lines. The Buffalo, dismissed by its creators, may have saved Finnish independence. The last surviving Finnish Buffalo pilot, Lentome Stari, Flight Sergeant Teppo Suhonen, died in 2019 at age 98. His final interview, given just months before his death, provides a fitting epitaph for the Buffalo story. "People ask me about the Buffalo. Was it really as bad as they say? I tell them, that plane saved my country. It saved my life dozens of times. Bad? No, it was perfect for us at that time in that place. We didn't need the best plane in the world. We needed the right plane. And for Finland, the Buffalo was exactly right." The recovery and preservation of BW-372 created an unexpected epilogue to the Buffalo story. When the aircraft was raised from Lake Kolkonjärvi, investigators found something remarkable in the cockpit: a photograph of a young woman, perfectly preserved in the cold water after 56 years. Research revealed it was the pilot's fiancée, whom he married after recovering from the crash. She was still alive to see her photograph recovered, creating a powerful human connection across the decades. The international recognition of Finnish Buffalo achievements has grown in recent years. American aviation museums now include sections on Finnish operations. The U.S. Navy Museum acknowledges that the aircraft they rejected became one of history's most successful fighters. British museums note that the same plane that failed in Malaya triumphed in Finland. This recognition, though decades late, validates the Finnish achievement. The technical lessons from Finnish Buffalo operations continue to influence modern air combat. The emphasis on energy management over turning fights, perfected by Finnish pilots, is now fundamental to fighter tactics. The importance of matching tactics to aircraft capabilities, rather than forcing aircraft into unsuitable combat styles, seems obvious now, but was revolutionary then. The Finnish experience proved that there are no bad aircraft, only aircraft used badly. The emotional resonance of the Buffalo story extends beyond aviation enthusiasts. It's a universal tale of the underdog triumphing against overwhelming odds. It speaks to human qualities that transcend nationality or era: ingenuity, determination, courage, and the refusal to accept defeat. In an age of high-technology warfare, it reminds us that human factors still determine victory. As we reach the culmination of this remarkable story, we must confront an uncomfortable truth that gives this tale its most powerful emotional twist. The Buffalo's extraordinary success in Finnish hands throws into sharp relief the tragic losses suffered by American, British, and Dutch pilots flying the same aircraft. While Finnish pilots were achieving the highest kill ratio of the war, American Marines at Midway were being slaughtered in their Buffaloes. While Hans Wind was shooting down 5 Soviet aircraft in a single mission, British pilots in Singapore were being overwhelmed by Japanese Zeros. These weren't inferior pilots. They were brave men doing their best with what they had. But they lacked the unique combination of factors that made Finnish success possible. They didn't have years to develop tactics suited to the Buffalo. They faced different enemies in different conditions. Most critically, they flew heavier, naval-equipped versions that performed significantly worse than the lightened Finnish variants. The same aircraft that made Finnish pilots aces made American pilots casualties. This dichotomy haunts military historians. Every Finnish victory represents not just tactical success, but a revelation of what could have been. How many American pilots might have survived midway if they'd known to fight like the Finns? How many British pilots might have lived if their Buffaloes had been modified like the B-239s? The Finnish success story is simultaneously a tale of triumph and a memorial to unnecessary losses elsewhere. The final irony is breathtaking. The United States, which designed and built the Buffalo, which pioneered military aviation and prided itself on technological superiority, had given away the secret to defeating one of its future allies. The Soviet Union, America's ally against Nazi Germany but future Cold War adversary, was humiliated by American planes in Finnish hands. The Buffalo became an unwitting player in the complex geopolitics that would define the post-war world. But perhaps the most powerful emotional truth lies in what the Buffalo represented to Finland itself. This wasn't just about shooting down enemy planes or a chai.